Good afternoon, everyone. Andy Jacob here with the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. We have a very unique show today. We've brought Mr. Mike Shapiro on the show today. This is the second time he's come on the Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. After our first interview, we had so many people reach out to us and say, hey, you have to get Mike back on the show. We want to learn more about what he's doing. And he really is incredible. Mike is a prolific writer. If you haven't read any of his blog posts, you need to go on MikeSShapiro.com. We'll, of course, put the links below the interview. Mike is a thought leader. I call him a zeitgeist and a shapeshifter. He really loves what he does. What I love about Mike so much is that he has a passion in finding joy in the success of other people. And it's really, really interesting. He has a great take on the economy. He understands what's happening in the markets, investing, and in real estate. Of course, he's got some very remarkable investments going on right now, which we spoke about on the last series. But what we really want to talk to Mike about is not only his coaching practice and how he coaches people on how to find their inner genius, but more importantly about some of the things that he's written about that are just so remarkable. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
You could call me either Mike or Michael. And I appreciate all the vote of confidence and all the wonderful kudos. So thank you very much. So I wonder if the only person who asked to see another segment is my mother. I'm always concerned.
It was your mother and I think my mother-in-law, both of them.
Who asked to see me again? Anyway, but I appreciate all the vote of confidence. Yes. So I do a lot of additional things other than my working at Plunk, which is, a thrill for me. And so I write a blog, and I started actually writing the blog. It was a request from Plunk when the pandemic hit. And so they asked, would I mind, because I always was talking online on Zoom about what was happening, what was going on, how is this going to impact real estate? And they said, Mike, you really should do this, and we'll put it in our website. You can do your own website as well. So it was kind of like a request from the existing company. And then I never really thought of myself as a blogger. And so I'm like, okay, let's try it out. So anyway, I've been doing this now. I think I'm full a year, maybe a little over a year, and I do it weekly. And I literally talk about what's happening in the markets today. What's my take on it? It's obviously very opinionated. And I try to back it up with research so that I'm not alone and I don't just say things without having some level of backup. So that's what I'm doing. And I've really enjoyed it. Actually, it's been really a pleasure to put pen to paper. I know it's typing on a keyboard, not pen to paper per se, but it's been a pleasure. And it's made me think more about the things that I have to work with. So having to consistently write about what's happening in the stock market, in the bond market, in the real estate markets, and how is it all impacting, and also what is COVID doing in the economy, what is it not, how are we coming out of this, has made me much more introspective and more well-read, because I have to on a daily basis, not that I didn't do before, but today I read 3 newspapers. I'm probably the last guy to read newspapers. And when I go to sleep at night, my wife thinks I'm out of my mind. I read the Washington Post, which apparently is relaxing to me, to go to sleep. So I try to get as much information as possible, and also all the news feeds on the internet. So
Mike, yeah. I love it. I love the blog. It is really addicting. You're very insightful on so many different topics that people are interested in. Before we talk about some of the blog posts that are just so fascinating, and some of your writing is really incredible, let's talk about this concept you have about reading the tape. You talk about that people need to be able to read the tape. And I think potentially that's going to be the name of your book when it comes out. And I hope that it is, because it makes all the sense in the world. How did you come up with this idea of reading the tape, and what is that all about for our viewers?
So reading the tape is... stocks were used to trade, and it was called a ticker tape. So it was, what I'm saying by reading the tape is that used to be stock pickers would just have this ticker tape and they would just read the tape and they make decisions on what they would invest in. So I have broadened that definition. And what I mean by reading the tape is essentially reading the room, reading what's happening, absorbing all the information and making decisions based on just an analysis of what's happening, making sure that you understand what's happening in the room, what are the narratives, what is the research, what's in the news. So that's what reading the tape is. And I think that people have lost the art of that in understanding how to navigate today's complex world. They are not reading the room. They're not reading the tape. So that's what I mean. I spent a career doing that, where I really believe that success comes from those types of behaviors and understanding what's around you, what's happening, what are the themes, what are the motivations. I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. For someone who's an entrepreneur watching the show, Michael, when they walk into a room or they walk into an investment gathering or they walk into a conference, when you say reading the room or read the tape, are you talking more about like when you have an interaction with someone, you're kind of reading them and trying to figure out sort of where they're at and where they're going and where they want to lead? Or are you more talking about just understanding your environment, understanding your surroundings, and doing the best that you possibly can in any surrounding that you're in?
I think it's all of the above. I think that, there's not one way that one does that. I am fortunate that I have ability to be empathetic, and I usually have a good understanding, I say, of what somebody's trying to communicate. And so if I'm meeting somebody, reading the tape would be, what are they wearing? What are their hand gestures? How's their intonation? What's their speaking style? What are they talking about? Multitude of other factors, I think, is when you're reading the tape, and it helps you have a much more successful interaction with somebody and understanding what they're trying to do or trying to get. What's on their desk? I mean, if you go into someone's office, or I think I talked about this in the earlier podcast, but like people look on podcasts, they look what's behind somebody, where are they sitting, they're reading it. So that is reading the tape or reading the room, like what's important to you, what's not important to you. Like I would look at you right now and you have your child in your imagery, and obviously you have another piece of beautiful art behind you. And so those are things that are important to you. So that's what I would do. I would find out if the person, like I'm in a hotel right now, I'm visiting my mom, and so what's behind me is somebody else's decision. So I don't necessarily know that I would read anything from what's behind me right now, but that's important. What is someone wearing? I think people don't understand that. So I think that it's not two-dimensional. It's very much three-dimensional way you should read something, and also in investing in a company. Whenever I've made an investment in a company, I always say I need to meet the people. And that's what you're betting on. I also insist on going to their office, which is always odd. And people are like, what do you mean? I'm like, I have to see where you work. Of course, this has been very difficult during COVID and has stopped me from doing certain things, but I can read from that. Is the office messy? Is it clean? Is it what's on the walls? What's not on the walls? How's the interaction? What's the culture like? All of these things make determinations of if is it a good investment for, it's obviously opinionated for me, or are they working well together? Does it feel positive in the environment? You can read, that's reading the tape. So when I was on the exchange floor, as you heard in an earlier podcast, I was a trader, and a great deal of my trading came from reading the tape, which is the noise of the crowd, what was going on, all of this. This is different today. People trade is on their phones or in front of a computer. So reading the tape is a very different perspective. So if it makes sense.
I love it. It makes all the sense in the world. And we all know that, communication, the majority of communication, is nonverbal. And is that what you're talking about?
I think it's a lot of, it's everything. Reading the tape is everything. Everything that someone does, says, wears, is in the entire environment is reading the tape. That's how you make better determinations on what you're trying to accomplish. Even if you're trying to communicate, even as simple as ordering at a restaurant. I mean, people don't tend to like even look at around, or what is the waiter behavioral patterns. I mean, people just are not observant in general. And those that are tend to have more successful engagement. So I do that, and I try to teach that as part of my coaching practice, and trying to teach people how to do that. And I think that everybody has their own ability or innate ability to read the tape. I'm not saying everyone is universally good at reading the tape. Like for me, I speak way too much, so probably I'm not reading the tape half the time because I'm doing all the talking.
Well, listen, Michael, that would be a wonderful thing for people to reach out to you, to learn from you how to read the tape. You have another very interesting concept that I just love, and again, maybe it's going to be your book number 2. It's called Finding Your Alpha, and I really love that, finding your edge to succeed. So you talk about people need to find their alpha, or they need to have an edge, or what their particular edge is. So how does a person find their edge? How does a person know what their alpha is?
So I don't know. Finding alpha is a financial term, and it means, what is your edge, or, what is the delta that you probably will make money. And so it's a very important term in investing. You can use it in success as well. However, I think I call it what's your inner genius most of the time, which they're similar terms. And what I mean by that, I think everybody, and I don't mean to sound corny or trite, or I really do believe, just like a fingerprint, and maybe I said this in an earlier podcast, I'm sorry. I really do believe that everyone has an inner genius. Everyone has a unique quality about them. And I think the problem in general coaching is that what people put out is like, do this, do this, do this. And I don't think that it's really one size fits all. So what I try to do is, and I'm certainly not qualified to, if somebody has issues deeper than I would like to be successful in my business. If they have other issues or depression issues, obviously they should see a professional. So I'm not qualified for that. But what I try to do is try to help them understand what makes them tick, what makes them great, what is about them. So I just ask questions. Usually just starts out really easy. And I always just say, like, what's easy for you? Like when you wake up, like what's super easy? What do you like to do? And it's really pretty simple. And some people just answer that. And then I'm like, well, why aren't you doing that? Also, I think people have to take stock of themselves, of what they're good at or not. And I think I can't stand this thing, like you can do anything. I don't agree with that. You cannot do everything. I'd like to play in the NFL. Well, that's absurd. Okay. I'm 58 years old. But I believe that that's something that people have to look at as well. And so if there's a level, that's a cruel word, delusion there, if I can coach them out of that, that's necessarily delusion. But if it's not something that's necessarily that they're capable of, I think they'll be a much happier life. All of these things are a pursuit of happiness. And this is a term that must be hundreds of thousands of books about the pursuit of happiness and how is one happy. But I do believe that when one feels professionally and personally successful, this tends to create happiness.
I love it, Michael. It makes all the sense in the world. You meet and consult with and invest with a group of super high profile and high powered people. So when you meet all of these different people in different verticals, is there one thing that you can sort of glean from all of these people that you know and have met and have invested with and have been successful with about their inner genius? Is there one thing that stands sort of not unique amongst them all, but they all have the same inner genius or in the same way? So is there one thing that they all have in common?
Well, I believe this is so funny that you're asking me this, because I was asked and I was honored. I have a neighbor, they have quite a few children, and one of their sons is in 7th grade, and he respects me, and he wanted to interview me for a class project in 7th grade. So I went over there, and this highly sophisticated paper was drawn up of questions he was supposed to ask me. He's in 7th grade, mind you. So I always laugh. Like, I have this saying I call it the Maxine maneuver, and I say how my 5-pound Yorkie poo has taught me how to be. And that's because I call the Maxine maneuver. Sometimes you're dealt a bad hand, and so if the dog does something wrong and she goes on her back, she looks cute, and you're like, it's fine. So I always say, if you have a bad hand and there's no way out, do the Maxine maneuver, roll on your back. So this young man who's, honor student, he's, one of these kids that's got it all, he's, athlete, this, that. And I love his parents, and they're close friends. And so I went over there thinking like, okay, 7th grade project, what is he going to ask me? And then he asked me the most interesting thing about mob mentality. And he was asking like, was I ever subjected to mob mentality? And I think that the teacher was trying to teach him something about this polarizing university we are in right now, and that people are following others and they're not really doing the research, or not really being themselves, or not really trying to necessarily do the right thing. So I thought it was really interesting. And so like a 7th grader is teaching me something again, right? And so I think what I find with people that are very successful, and that's on only money, they're on their own. They do their own, they're not following, and I say this for a positive way. I want them to do positive things, because sometimes there's a negative connotation with that. But in general, those are people are just not following others. They're on their own mission. I always say you're always paid, and I'm not alone in this. I'm not certainly reinventing the wheel here, but you're always paid for your creativity. So be creative.
I love it. It makes all the sense in the world, Michael. And, when I go on your blog, some of your titles are just so engaging. It just makes me want to read it. You talk about, of course, finding your alpha. You've got a great blog post about big tech and Bitcoin, which is very interesting. You have a great blog post called Mini Inflation Nation. And then, you talk a lot about home equity and residential real estate as, of course, one of the managing partner at Plunk. Let's talk about one of the blog posts, because I found it so fascinating, and I wanted you to give some information to the people watching the show. The name of the blog post was Home Value Equals Science Plus Emotion. And I thought that was super interesting. Could you sort of bring us inside your thought process about home valuation right now and what's going on in the residential real estate investment area?
Sure. First of all, I just want to correct you. I'm managing director, so I do not run the company. There's a president and a CEO. So I do not want them to be upset after they watch this. Okay. I'll get a call. Yes, I was trying to say that housing valuations are frothy, and it's not only about how do you decide on what valuation is? And there's a narrative that occurs. And so there's we went back to the earlier thing about mob mentality. There is a mob mentality happening right now where obviously the housing situation was set up to go up. I think COVID put gas on that fire. And I talked about this earlier, where the commercialization of housing, where your house is everything, your office, your gym, your everything, your restaurant, everything is in your house. So that added fuel to the fire. But I'm talking about the narrative, what is happening. And so one should look deeper than just, this narrative. Is there value? How fast can it grow? Is it going to continue to grow? So there are all of these other values, investing metrics. So that's really important to me. One of my idols in investing is Warren Buffett, and he is the anti-narrative guy. He's the narrative guy, but he's about value. Does this company make good products? Do I understand this company? Does this make sense? Are they growing in market share? Do they own? So it's a similar thing when you look at housing. So I was worried about tertiary markets. So there are markets in the United States that are always prime, and they always will be prime. And Aspens, Beverly Hills, Manhattan, although they got really hit in COVID, Palm Beach. There are growth markets, Austin, Nashville, Seattle. What's driving those things? You have to look under the hood. Employment is driving Seattle. I mean, some of the major, most important tech companies in the nation are in Seattle. Look what's happened: Amazon, Microsoft, Costco. These are important companies for our nation's infrastructure, and subsequently it's generated fantastic jobs. And so there's more and more people buying housing. So what's moving that versus you see other markets? There was just an article, I think it was the Wall Street Journal or Yahoo Finance, I'm not sure. And they actually said the 50 worst or the ugliest markets in the nation. And they actually started looking at what other markets are not good, and they did it based on foreclosure rates. And so there was all of these markets in Florida, which I disagree. So people aren't looking under the hood, like all these markets in Florida. This is terrible, all these foreclosure rates. Why is that happening? Even though the prices were going up, quite a few of those markets were the Midwest. I'm not surprised. A lot of industries left, and so it makes sense that they're going down as high foreclosure rates because people don't have jobs. But on the other hand, why is the Florida? So that's another example of looking under the hood. What's happening? Why is that happening? So there may be taxation issues. Who knows? What's driving that information, if that makes any sense. So that's what I was trying to say. Narratives create things. One of the great narratives individuals, and I think everyone can agree with this, is Elon Musk. Elon Musk is an extraordinary storyteller. Look what he has done. And in fact, he's such a brilliant individual. He was just on Saturday Night Live. So any polarizing behavior that he had accomplished before, he eliminated within an hour and a half by making fun of himself, having his mother on. I mean, he's brilliant. I'm not saying that's not who he is. I'm not saying that, this wasn't crafted, but the brilliant successful is unparalleled. I mean, we should all learn from this individual and what he's done and his accomplishments. And of course, he has the intellect, capability, capital, and know-how to accomplish these amazing feats. And it's extraordinary. It really is.
And of course, he knows how to read the tape. So that's absolutely extraordinary. Yes. Mike, when we talk about your coaching and the people that you help, you have this very, very interesting approach that is just so joyful. And what I love about it is you try and find the joy in the success of others. And, some people believe that when people become successful, 80% of the people don't care, and that there's another 20% of the people that are kind of mad that you became successful. So you have a different approach. You like people to become successful. You take great joy and pride in that, in helping people through your coaching process, and also, of course, through your keynote speaking and things like that. What is it about you that really loves it when you can help someone become successful versus so many other people that really don't wish people to be successful?
Well, I don't, I am hopeful that a lot of people enjoy other people's success. I hope I'm not the only person. I know I'm not the only person, but I find tremendous joy in that. And that's my LinkedIn profile. I say that because the sense of accomplishment is not in my own person here, is not through my accomplishments, but through my ability to see others accomplish things. I cannot explain why that is, but and I've overused joy here, but when I have somebody say to me these words, Mike, you really changed my life. That I'm getting emotional. That really feels good to me. I love that. I must have, as I said in an earlier blog, with you. I must have gotten that from my father. My father consistently had people in the home who were asking for his help and advice, and he was always helping consistently, no matter what walk of life they came from. So that is part of my DNA, and I love that. And it happens consistently for me, which I'm blessed by that. So why is that? I don't know. I don't do it selfishly, but it does come back. I mean, I never really think about when I help others. I'm like, oh, well, it's going to come back. I mean, it's like almost biblical in nature, but it does. Like doing things is, and I'm certainly not selfless. It's ridiculous. But I mean, doing things as best you can to be selfless always comes back in spades. It does. It tremendous amounts of, you give so much more joy to others. And all I ask of people when I've coached them or helped them or whatever I've done for them to pave the way for their success, I ask them for one thing. I only ask them to, and this is a common term, pay it forward. So do this for someone else. It's all I ever ask. And they do. So, because they say, hey, this feels pretty good. And then they'll call me and say, that feels good, doesn't it? It's like, yeah, it does, doesn't it? So yes, that's why. I'm not sure I've answered your question, but that's who I am.
I love it. It makes all the sense in the world. And of course, you know, when you help people, it feels so wonderful. Now, when I go to your blog, I see so many different articles that are so interesting, and everybody has to go to the blog. You need to check it out. You need to see this writing, because it really, not only is it just Mike's sort of thought process, but he brings you inside. He gives you data. He gives you proof of his position and his concepts. It's very, very interesting. One thing that's on everybody's mind that you touch on in the blog is inflation. And you have a blog post called The Mini Inflation Nation. And I tried to say that 3 times real fast, and I didn't quite do it very well. But could you talk about that blog post a little bit and where you're seeing, you know, our nation going with regard to inflation? Because it's on everybody's minds right now, and it's very topical.
Well, inflation is an erosion of purchasing power. And so one of the things that's interesting about human dynamics is that inflation actually is good for the overall economy on a very small scale. So the federal government or Federal Reserve and Treasury sectors, all of these people want a small amount of inflation. It is an illusion of price increases, which for whatever reason makes people feel good. But too much of that is an erosion of the actual value. So people don't understand that. So what does inflation nation mean is that housing has increased, significantly over the last year or 2 years. And those are real dollar increases. But if we have significant inflation and we don't have significant movement to the upside, that'll erode the actual purchase power of that item, if I'm making myself clear. So it is a positive element to human emotion. People want to see prices rise. The opposite holds true of deflation. Why is deflation so bad? People don't necessarily understand this. Deflation is exactly the opposite. Why is deflation bad? Because if I told you that the dollar that's in your bank or pocket is worth more tomorrow, what are you going to do with that dollar? Nothing. So if you know that your money is growing without doing anything, you're not going to do anything. On the other hand, if your inflation is so great, then the opposite holds true. And so there's this fine line that has to be played out. And so people don't understand that, and people should be focused on that. Of course, it's the topic of conversation today because of the amount of liquidity that's gone into the marketplace. Is an important part of economic development, a slight amount. And we've seen that for a long period of time. But there's many different ways to look at inflation. There are many arguments of what inflation means. And so inflation numbers are typically excluding energy and food, which I find odd because I think you need that on a daily basis. So anyone who's gone to the supermarket recently or gone to the gas pump knows that there's significant increases in prices, which is inflationary.
Makes sense.
That's what's happening today. So
Makes
what do you
sense.
do to tamp it down? You increase interest rates. And if you increase interest rates too much, it tamps down the economy. So they have to run the gauntlet now to make sure the economy grows as rapidly as they can to get out of COVID, and not necessarily worry about inflation until they feel that the economy is fully grown, and then they sort of tamp it down. I don't think we'll ever go back to those interest rates we had in, was it the 80s? I don't know, the early 80s. So.
Sounds like a real balancing act, and it sounds like some very, very talented, genius type people need to try and figure out how to balance it and just keep it sort of on the edges of the balance without going over the edges of the balance, because that's when they get in trouble. And let's hope that we have super smart people out there that are figuring it all out, and they're keeping that type of balance that you're talking about. You know, Mike, when we think about your writing and we think about, you know, the blog that you have, I've gone through it, and there's another very hot topic of conversation right now. You know, we touched on inflation, we touched on home value and residential real estate. One topic of conversation that you actually touch on in the blog as well is you have a blog post entitled Big Tech and Bitcoin. And of course, you know, everybody's interested in, you know, fungible tokens now, and Bitcoin and, you know, Ethereum and everything else that's going on. So where do you sort of point toward reading the room or reading the tape with what's happening with the digital currency? Could you give our viewers some color on how Mike Shapiro thinks about the whole space?
Yeah. So let me preface by saying I'm an old man, number one. Number two, this is purely my opinion, so please do not follow what my lead is on this. And clearly, it's here to stay. And, you know, Goldman Sachs just announced they're hiring a trading team for cryptocurrencies. So my belief is that I don't understand it, because the very concept of having such a highly volatile thing called currency, how would you even price something in that currency when you have to convert it back into dollars, number one? I also think that currency is the purview of governments for multiple reasons. We just discussed inflation. The very nature of dollars is how do you control that through the ebb and flow of how much liquidity there is. So the whole concept came about by going around the concept of centralized money. So it's in my opinion that at some point, and it's relatively minor right now, if people start using cryptocurrency instead of dollars, that's not going to work. Okay. The governments are not going to allow that. Now, whether or not governments then issue their own cryptocurrency, of course they will, but that's under their purview or the control over the government. So I think long-term prospects, I mean, I do think that there's some level of value there, obviously. I mean, look what's happened, but I think it's too volatile and too much to even place a value investment. And I've noticed, you know, all of these people are running into this back and forth, and even Elon was taking Bitcoin for his cars, and, you know, a large part of his portfolio in cash, he actually made money on it, I believe, was one of the earnings statements, if I have that correct. But now it fell down again. So I'm not a big believer from a value investing concept. I think we see a lot of what's happening in investing world today, following in the footsteps of this cryptocurrency craze. You know, NFTs are another issue altogether, and that makes a lot of sense. I don't want to, you know, this thing called blockchain technology is very important, and I don't want to confuse the two. NFT is using blockchain technology to identify something that's an asset that actually can be identified as being real. So there's something to be said about these NFTs rather than cryptocurrencies. But I am in the minority at this point and not believing in cryptocurrencies. So I may be changing my mind. Now, I will admit to the fact that I have traded cryptocurrencies, but I've simply traded it like as if I'm in a casino. And so I've used all of the mentality associated with momentum trading to trade these cryptocurrencies, but I'm not an investor in them.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Very interesting, Mike. I love it so much. I want to turn the conversation and spin it just a little bit to one of my favorite subjects that you're an expert on, which is branding. And you really have some interesting blog posts about the importance of brands, the importance of branding. And we have so many people watch the show that are interested in this concept about brands, their brand, how to make their brand a world-class brand. You're an expert on the subject, so maybe you could talk about the importance of brands, if you don't mind.
Well, branding is everything. Branding is, there's obvious value in brands, and everything we've discussed earlier leads into this. So the narrative, and what is the narrative of the brand, and what is the identifier? So branding is, our entire world is associated with a brand, even your own personal brand. What is the information that you're putting out? That means that you're as an individual, and everything you buy and everything you do is probably associated with some level of branding or marketing. And that's something you should turn on yourselves as well. And like, what is your own personal brand? Are you in your brand? Are you on brand? And a lot of people don't understand that to be successful, they need to stay on brand. How are they communicating? Are they flipping around? Are they not making sense? So it's just interesting. You pay more for brands. You pay less for brands. There are negative connotations to brands. How do you do that? What do you do if suddenly there's a negative aspect that happens to a brand? So what is brand? Brand is a communication of an item or a person or a concept or service that identifies what that they or it or what that service is doing in a simple word or logo. And they've created all sorts of things around that to create that. So it's really interesting. It's one of the most important aspects to success is branding. And what are you doing, and who and how are you creating branding?
And for people wanting to know more, you should definitely go to Mike's blog. He has some wonderful articles. And Mike, I know I've sort of taken you all over the world today. I mean, we talked about the importance of brands. We talked about the science and emotion of home values. We've talked about residential real estate as an investment. We've talked about mini inflation and whether we're a mini inflation nation. We talked about Bitcoin. We talked about blockchain. We've talked about non-fungible tokens. We talked about finding your alpha, the edge, which is just amazing. And of course, how to read the tape. And it's incredible, what we can get in. And I only allotted a certain amount of time. And I know you've already given me more time than what I've allotted, but I only get these types of shows every so often when I get a leader in the space on a field. So pardon me for holding you over a little bit, Mike. But what I wanted to do here is I wanted to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship, because it's one thing to be a prolific writer and a thought leader and a shapeshifter. It's another thing to finding joy in the success of others. And I know that if you can impart some wisdom to the younger entrepreneurs watching the show, that would be wonderful. And I know that they will pay it forward like you love them to do as part of your process as a coach and a keynote speaker and the like. So, Mike, one thing we spoke about during our first interview, and I wanted to touch on it again because I feel it's so important that we really should touch on it again, is so many people in this day and age really, I believe, need to have more of a can-do attitude versus a can't-do attitude. And sometimes young entrepreneurs, they hit a snag. Sometimes they hit a roadblock. Sometimes they hit a pothole and they don't know how to get through it. And sometimes it's just about that attitude, that can-do attitude. So maybe you could talk to the younger entrepreneurs that are maybe facing a difficulty, or maybe a seasoned entrepreneur that's facing a challenge that they haven't had yet in their business, and tell them sort of from your perspective what it means to have a can-do attitude and how they can get through the current roadblock that they're looking at.
Well, let's unpack that. So, pardon me. That's an attitude issue. So, I think that the best entrepreneurs are ones that don't allow the walls that get in your way, and they always will, or the failures. We talked about this in an earlier blog. The best of them take those when you fall and get up and move and pivot. So what do I say? Keep going at it. And kind of this is an interesting issue because a lot of people will continue to go at something when there's consistent failure and failure and failure and failure. So when do you know when it's not right or wrong? Or probably some other questions as well. And I think that if you surround yourself with a lot of really positive people who are experts in the space, listen to them. If, for example, you're hitting a wall, a roadblock. The company I'm at right now, it was a startup and it's now functioning. And, you know, when you hire people for startups, you give them stock and you give them less income. And it was an interesting conversation, somebody that they wanted to hire. And the gentleman who's brilliant, and I love him to pieces in my company. And he asked me this interesting question. He said, I have to interview you. I'm like, okay. And I was laughing. What is the likelihood of this succeeding? Which was a fair question because he was a very highly paid job. And I said, there's no guarantees in life. And I said, what you have is the three leaders of this company have been through all of the cycles of business from succeeding and failing and succeeding and failing. But what they all have in common is that no matter what, they continue to pivot and to make sure that it became successful. So that is the driver. So don't give up. Just change the way you're doing it, or change what you're doing or how you're doing it. And surround yourself with really smart people in that space who have expertise. And listen to others and read the tape and be positive. So
I love it.
I hope that's answering your question.
It's answering the question. You know, it's beautiful because a lot of people, they think that a pivot or changing or looking at something in a new way, sometimes younger entrepreneurs look at that as a negative because somewhere along the way, somebody told them, don't change, you know, stay with what you're doing. But sometimes in business, you need to change because you need to read the tape. You need to read the room. Exactly. And that's, of course, goes into talking about a minimal viable product and things like that we talk about on the show that many of the people listening know about. Mike, we unpacked it all. I mean, this is a lot that we covered. I know a lot of people are going to want to read the blog post that you post now, I believe on a weekly basis at MikeSShapiro.com. We'll put all the links below the podcast here, Mike. I was really looking forward to our second interview. It's very interesting when you and I talk because we could take one of your blog posts, just one, and we probably could talk about it for 3-4 hours. And then we would only have talked about one blog post. So we moved around a little bit today. And I want to thank you for being flexible with me on that.
Absolutely. Well, it's always a pleasure. I love your show and I love your attitude. And it's a classic example of a successful person. Your attitude shows through on the screen and this positive energy that you put forth. And that is the ultimate guide. So
I love it, Mike. Again, thank you so much for coming on the show, coaching people on how to find their inner genius. I think I'm going to hire Mike myself because according to my wife, I need to find my inner genius real quick or she's going to toss me out of the house, Mike.
There you go.
Thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.